Okay, so my name's Austin, and this is my next video in the series on why I love the novel Infinite Jest. And in this video, I'll be discussing a conversation that happens between Joelle and Gately that begins on page 531, but the part that I'm interested in starts on page 533. So the conversation in its opening is simply Gately telling a story from his past, but it eventually becomes a conversation about Joelle and her veil and the UHID and how that fellowship works in seeming contradiction to AA. And one thing that I like about this conversation is that it seems to cover a number of the themes of the book in a very compressed amount of pages. So, at the highest level, this conversation is, Gately trying to understand why you would wear a veil, because from his perspective, this is hiding, and how it doesn't make sense to him because he would expect a fellowship about people that are hideously and improbably deformed to be about coming together and finding a way to not hide anymore, to completely show the way you are to the rest of the world, to not wear a veil. That for him, this is what this fellowship would be about. But Joelle presents a different stance on this, that in fact wearing the veil is an act of openness, where even if the veil is hiding something physically, it is an admission of something that's emotional, right? It is being open about one's emotional state. At the highest level I can give, the idea is the emotion that it's being honest about is shame, a certain form of shame associated with being deformed, where a person that's in UHID, the fictional organization, would try to be in public without wearing a veil or without wearing any covering to show, or basically fully exposed, whatever their deformity is, exposed. And they would try to show up in public and be in social settings like this. And what would happen is people would stare at them and they would turn their head and catch them, and then the other person would look away and pretend that it didn't happen. Or someone that they're talking to would go to such lengths to make it seem like they don't notice their deformity that it makes it obvious that they do, just in the way that they talk to them. That a lot of things about the social situation in which a person is leaving their deformities exposed makes it very hard to participate in it. And then there is a level of shame on the side of the person that is deformed, that when people look away from them or act like they don't care when they do, these things all make the deformed person very self-conscious, very aware of themselves, to the point where they can't participate in this conversation or any social setting. They cannot be present in this situation. And this shame is only one element of it. This is the part that they don't necessarily need to be open about. The thing that the veil affords them to be open about is the shame of that shame, right? They can tell themselves in these social settings, I should not be affected by the way people look at me. I should not be affected by the way people talk to me. That I should be able to know these things aren't any kind of commentary on who I am as a human being, that it has much more to do with the person that I'm talking to than it does me. That there is a feeling that a person should be able to rationalize this and to talk themselves out of being ashamed, and therefore not feel any shame in a social situation, which allows them to maintain full presence in this. And there is a shame about not being able to overcome the way that you feel when people look at you, right? This idea that I should be able to make it past it, but I can't. And now I am ashamed of the fact that I cannot make it past the situation that I'm in. That I feel terrible. Even though I know I shouldn't, I feel terrible. And it is this shame, this sort of secondary level, this, for lack of a better term, being ashamed of being ashamed. This is what the person who wears a veil is admitting when they wear one. That they can't get past the self-consciousness they feel when their deformities are exposed. To wear a veil is an admission of a powerlessness over overcoming this shame. And this is what the openness is about, right? It is obviously physically hiding something, but it is an emotional openness that there are certain things that no matter how much they would like to, they just can't overcome. And so at a high level, this is a lot of what the conversation is. There's more in there than that, but it's a lot of what the conversation is. And what I really like about this is it seems to cover, like I said, a number of themes of this book really, really well. The first is that every human being has something to offer one another, right? There's an idea in my personal life that I try my best to remind myself of, which is that there isn't a human being on this planet who I have nothing to learn from. And this section seems to really highlight this, because Don, if he could maintain a certain openness towards what Joel is saying, could potentially learn something about himself and about AA and about sobriety in a way that would really help him, even though theoretically, he has much more sober time than Joel at this point. And theoretically, he's the one that would know more about AA. There is something within this conversation that he could learn from, which is the idea of sacrificing rationality to produce a desired result. And this is something that he seems to already know in terms of sobriety, but he has it limited to just this example of sacrificing rationality to achieve sobriety. But in reality, this idea can be applied to more situations, that it is a much more universal idea than simply in the world of AA and substance abuse and getting clean. The way that Joel is presenting this, to say that I am doing something irrational to achieve a desired outcome, is when she talks about how she needs to participate in society. She mentions towards the bottom of page 534, but Don, you're still a human being. You still want to live. You crave connection in society. You know intellectually that you're no less worthy of connection in society than anyone else simply because of how you appear. You know that hiding yourself away out of fear of gazes is really giving into a shame that is not required and that will keep you from the kind of life you deserve as much as the next girl. Right? There is an outcome that needs to happen here, which is participating in society, that interacting with other human beings. This is an outcome that needs to happen. And at some point, if all you're worried about is this result, then it doesn't matter what you do to get there. In this case, if wearing a veil is what allows her to be a member of society, then that's what she's going to do. Right? It's not a matter of, oh, I should be able to overcome this. It's, I just want to be able to go out and talk to people. And if wearing a veil is what is required to do that, then that's what I'm going to do. I don't care if it doesn't make sense. And, this is something that Joelle has to offer to Gately. And I think this is an interesting idea that, someone that's a newcomer could give something to someone who has over a year of sobriety at this point, who is supposed to be more of the, guiding presence in this situation. That if he could find a certain openness to listening to her, then he has something that the conversation is giving him something that he could learn from. Another theme that I think is presented well in this section is an idea that gets expressed explicitly later in the book, is how newcomers might look at someone with a year or two of sobriety and think, wow, this person has it all together, they're incredible. But in reality, the person with a little bit more sobriety time is still just as clueless as they are. That they might have figured out all of the routines and behaviors that they need to engage in order to, go another day without abusing a substance. But they by no means have everything figured out. And I think this conversation does a great job of showing how Gately hasn't figured out everything, because in many ways he is living in contradiction of ideas that he has expressed earlier in the book. Right? One of the main ideas that came out of the Boston AA meeting in Gately's internal monologue was about not asking yourself the question, why? Why do I have the disease? Why do I do these things? Right? To throw the word why out the window, to avoid any questions that try to give some kind of explanation as to what's going on. And yet, despite knowing this and how much it applies to sobriety, he really is trying to get an answer to the question, why, in this conversation. At one point, he explicitly says, and still the thing I don't get is why join a fellowship just to hide. Right? He is taking an idea that he more or less knows is true, but hasn't figured out how to apply it to other situations. And this is sort of an example of his cluelessness and how much he still has to figure out. And this idea that no human being has everything put together. Even if they've put together a certain way of living that has helped them achieve certain things in their life, it is not like they've found a universal solution to all their problems. And so I think this conversation also does a very good job of highlighting that. The final thing I'll say is this conversation, one final theme that it really displays is to show how two people can believe they're in disagreement with one another even though they're saying the exact same thing. That there is a conversation here about openness and hiding, in which both characters are saying how important it is for them to be open. And yet, despite both of them trying to say how important openness is, they believe they're disagreeing with one another. And this is something that occurs throughout the book. And it is also sort of Gately showing, in some degree, a level of cluelessness over another idea that he expressed internally in the Boston AA meeting, which is the difference between listening and hearing. The ability to find the similarities between you and this person and what they're saying. How Gately has found a way to sit in an AA meeting and truly hear what this person is having to say. But in this conversation with Joelle, he hasn't developed that ability yet. And so I think this conversation does a lot of work to cover ideas on the imperfections of humanity in a very small amount of time. And yeah, I think it's really good. Anyways, that's all.